Hey, what's up, y'all? So, I was actually on the internet this morning, or on YouTube specifically, and I saw this video by Texas Black Diamond, and the video is titled "Don Russell Takes a Plea Deal." So, what does that mean? And other people have actually posted similar videos, and I think I actually ran across one video that basically, and maybe they mentioned it here, that Arline Jr. actually is in talks to get a plea deal, right? So I actually tried to find information pertaining to these specific plea deals on online, Google, YouTube, and I wasn't really able to find anything. I wasn't able to find anything. So I don't know if it's true that these guys are in the midst of taking a plea deal, or if they've taken a plea deal. I don't know. But I did mention in another video I did, actually, I had a video called Will Don Flip? And I think this is a really good time just to look at plea deals in general, right? And specifically, what a plea deal could possibly mean for R. Kelly, right? So just to be clear, I have no proof that these guys, Don Russell or Arline Jr., has taken a plea deal, but I'm just using this time as an opportunity to talk about plea deals, right? So I actually made a comment on Texas Black Diamond's page. So I was reading Stephanie D's comment. She goes, him taking a plea deal doesn't mean he's going against R. Kelly or that he himself is guilty. He could just be pleading so that he doesn't have to try to fight a case himself. Look how long R. Kelly has been fighting. Them attorney and court fees add up quick. He said he has a good attorney, so I'm guessing that attorney's worked out a plea deal, and that was worth taking versus trying to fight it, right? So I actually responded to this and I said, don't be fooled. They're not going to offer him a plea deal unless he gives up something in return. What do you think he has to give up? And I'm just being real. Those are my thoughts on that, right? So if you think the government is going to take a plea deal without, in this particular situation, every situation is different. But if you think the government is going to take a plea deal in this situation, leave your questions and comments below and let me know. But I think you're crazy to think that the government is going to allow him to take a plea deal without offering something good in return. So we're going to get into the law, and that's the purpose of this video. We're going to look at the rule governing the actual plea deals, right? So then we go on to say, oh, she goes on to say, and she basically quotes me, or she directs her comment to me. Every plea deal doesn't involve telling on somebody else. Plea deals don't always involve giving up something either. A plea deal is done in lieu of going to trial. People charged with murder or other violent offenses, take plea deals all the time that don't involve other people. They do it to reduce their sentence or because they don't want to take a chance on a jury. Plus, prosecutors prefer people to plea because it's a win for them, and without having to prove their case. We just gotta see because we don't have any details. So you know what? I can't really refute that wisdom. We have to see because we don't have any details. I myself don't have any details. I don't have any facts other what I'm about to show you. All I have are the facts and my intuition, and whether or not Don flips, whether or not Arline Jr. flips, is something we may never even know, right? Unless it comes out in trial, right? So I'm making this video, and the video is, first I'm going to start off with the actual facts, and then I'm going to basically come back with some commentary on why I think he's actually taking a plea deal and what that could possibly mean for R. Kelly. So we're going to have the facts, but the facts is only going to be based on what the law is, and then we're going to have my opinion, and I'm telling you up front, that's all it is an opinion. So I have before me the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, right? I'm sorry, the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. I'm so used to saying Federal Rules of Civil Procedure that it just kind of rolls off my tongue. But I have before me the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, right? Don't confuse the two, right? And then Rule 11 talks about the pleas, right? So it goes on to say, in general, a defendant may plead not guilty, guilty, or with the court's consent, nolo contendere, right? Or nolo contendere. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's Latin, a dead language. You tell me how it's pronounced. But basically, it's no contest, right? And then it goes on, conditional plea. It goes on to say, with the consent of the court and the government, a defendant may enter a conditional plea of guilty or nolo contendere, right? Reserving in writing the right to have an appellate court review an adverse determination of the specified pretrial motion. A defendant who prevails on appeal may then withdraw the plea, right? So let's just stop right here because I think it's going to be relevant to a lot of stuff that has been said by Stephanie D. Um, so first, I just think this is a really neat feature in the criminal process. You could be in a crime, or you could be involved in an altercation where you were defending yourself, and in that course of events, you end up killing somebody by accident, or maybe not by accident. Maybe you were trying to defend yourself, and now you're up on these charges where you're going to jail for murder. uh, with the consent of the court and the government, you can basically plead no contest. And then if the court rules against you, you can go directly to appeals court. So I think this kind of lends itself to some of the things that Stephanie D was saying, and that this type of plea is going to allow you to avoid a lot of legal fees and costs, right? Because in a traditional trial, you would go to trial, and then if you lose in that trial, then you would have to go to the appeals court. And in both of those cases, you're going to spend a lot of money. Well, with this option, you can skip some of the trial process and just go ahead and submit this plea. And then the judge, and you can tell the judge your side of the story. And then if you get a bad judgment, then you can just go ahead directly to appeals court. So you kind of skip that whole jury thing. You kind of skip, all that goes along into that trial. Um, if I'm wrong, you guys let me know. Leave your questions and comments below. If you've ever been in this situation where you put in a no contest for a particular crime in federal court, let us hear from you. Tell us your story below, right? So this goes into a lot of what Stephanie D was saying. So just moving on. Nolo contendere plea. Before accepting a plea or nolo contendere, the court must consider the parties' views and public interest in the effect of administration of justice. So they're going to balance all the interest of both sides of the table. They're going to balance your interests, right? Which is that you want to be free, of course. And then if there's any victims, they're going to look at the victim's interest. And then they're going to look at the, what do you call it? I'm sorry, public interest. They're going to look at the public interest. And to me, I take that to mean that basically they're going to ask themselves, is this good for society to, let people off, or, what would society expect happen? So I'm really just putting my own opinion on this. I'm just making most of this stuff up as I go along. A lot of you may already know, but if you're new to this channel, or you're new and you're watching this video for the first time, I am not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be a lawyer. I'm just some guy on the internet reading legal documents, right? So I think one of the most important things to take note of is that you have to have permission to put in a conditional plea of no contest, right? A conditional plea, or a guilty or nolo contendere, you have to have the court's permission, and you have to have the government's permission. And by the government, basically, I take it to mean they're talking about the federal prosecutors, right? And some other interesting things is that this section here, B, it goes on to say, considering and accepting a guilty plea or nolo contendere plea, advising and questioning the defendant before the court accepts a plea of guilty or nolo contendere. The defendant may be placed under oath, and the court must address the defendant personally in open court. During this address, the court must inform the defendant of and determine that the defendant understands the following, right? And I'm not going to read all this, but this is, if you ever seen like anything on YouTube where the defendant pleads guilty, this is the section where he asks the defendant if anyone's promised you anything. Are you of sound mind, sound body? Do you understand you have a right to a jury trial? The right to be represented by counsel. It's basically, in my opinion, it's a legal process that the court has to go through to make sure that the person who's pleading guilty understands all their rights and they understand what their plea is going to mean. That's what I take it to mean, but I'm not going to read all that. And then let's move on. Ensuring that a plea is voluntary. Before accepting a plea or guilty plea or no contest, the court must address the defendant personally in open court to determine that the plea is voluntary and did not result from force, threats, or promises other than the promise in a plea agreement, right? And speaking of promises, the prosecutors actually aren't able to promise much, as we're going to see here, right? Determining the factual basis for the plea. Before entering the judgment on a guilty plea, the court must determine that there is factual basis for the plea. Now, this is important. This is really important, especially when we're talking about Don Russell and we're talking about Arline Jr. I don't know that they pleaded. I have no idea that they pleaded, or I don't know if they're working on a guilty plea. Let's just go ahead and pretend there is a scenario where they are working on the plea and they plan to put this plea before the court. In my personal opinion, this section requires them to basically come to court and tell a story of why they're guilty. They're not going to allow you to plea unless you're going to tell the court why you're guilty. Now, the exception to this is a no contest plea. But again, as I've already read, the government has to approve of a no contest plea. Now, keep that in mind because it's going to be important when I wrap up this video. So keep in mind that number one, if you want to do a no contest plea, the government is going to have to approve that. We've already read that. And then keep in mind here that before entering a judgment on a guilty plea, the court must determine that there is a factual basis for the plea. Meaning you just can't go to court and say, okay, I plead guilty, go ahead and give me a sentence. No, you can't do that. You're going to have to go to court and you're going to have to tell the story. And just remember this because it's going to be important when I wrap up this video. And if you think this means something different, definitely leave your questions, comments below, and let me know what your thoughts are on this. Right. So, plea agreement procedure. In general, an attorney for the government and the defendant's attorney of the defendant, when proceeding pro se, may discuss and reach a plea agreement. Right. So, either your attorney and the government's attorneys is going to get together, or you and the government is going to get together to basically discuss and reach a plea agreement. Now, there's some key words here. It says may, and usually when I see stuff like this, it makes me believe that you could possibly. To me, it makes when I see a word like may, it makes me think that there's other options, right? Possibly that you can go and just make a plea agreement on your own with the court and then see if the court will accept it. But generally, that's probably going to not be a good idea because of some stuff we're going to read uh, at the end of this section, right? So basically, generally, you and your attorney are going to, well, your attorney is going to work with the government to draft a plea agreement, right? The court must not participate in these discussions if the defendant pleads guilty or no contest to either charge or offenses or lesser or related offenses. The plea agreement may specify that an attorney for the government will, and this is important, and this is key. It's going to be key when I wrap up this video in a few seconds here, right? So, plea agreement may specify that an attorney for the government will A, not bring or will move to dismiss other charges. So here the government is saying, okay, you pleaded and we want to accept your plea. So we are not going to bring certain charges, or we're going to move to dismiss other charges, right? So that's part of your plea agreement, right? This is an advantage to making a plea agreement. So this right off the bat, it kind of goes against what Stephanie D was saying, because the whole purpose of making a plea is, hey, you want them to not bring certain charges, or you want them to dismiss other charges. Now remember, Don Russell was not hit with the RICO charge. This could be possibly something that they were hanging over his head, and they were essentially could have been, right? I don't know that they did. I don't know that they didn't. I'm just theorizing here, right? This is all within a theory. This is not, I'm not actually making any allegations here. I'm just putting a theory before you, right? So my theory is that they didn't charge Don Russell with the RICO charge. They either didn't charge him because they didn't think he was guilty of it, or they didn't charge him because they wanted to use it as leverage in plea negotiations, right? That's my theory, right? Now, of course, what Stephanie D was saying is that some people want to skip the trial because it's just going to be too costly to fight. Yeah, that's relevant. That could be the case, right? But just moving on. So, and then the government can also recommend or agree not to oppose the defendant's request that a particular sentence or sentencing range is appropriate, or that a particular provision of the sentencing guidelines or policy statement or a sentencing factor does or does not apply. Such recommendations or requests does not bind the court, right? So basically here in this example, it looks like the government can say, hey, look, you can go to the judge and you can argue what sentence you want, not argue, but you can go to the judge and you can recommend your own sentence. We won't oppose you on the sentencing guidelines, right? We'll leave that up to you and the judge. So you can plead guilty, and you can work that out with the judge. Whatever you and the judge work out, we won't get involved. So that's what B is saying. And then the government could also agree that a specific sentence or sentencing range is the appropriate disposition of the case, or that a particular provision of the sentencing guidelines or policy statement or sentencing factor does or does not apply. Such a recommendation or request binds the court once the court accepts the plea agreement. So this is interesting. So the if the government if you and the government takes the first option where you and the judge work that out, that's not binding, right? Even though the judge may give you a lighter sentence, it's still not binding. The government could always come back and say, hey, well, you know what, that sentence was too light, or the court themselves can come back and say that sentence was too light, it's too easy. We need to give you a harder sentence. So I'm just going to revoke that last judgment. I'm going to vacate that last judgment, and I'm going to put in a new judgment to give you a tougher sentencing. Right? That can happen, right? But if the government comes forth and say, hey, you know what? He shouldn't get 20 years. We think 3 years is appropriate. Then that's going to be binding, and the government can do that, right? So, and then let's see if there's anything else. Disclosing a plea agreement. The party must disclose the plea agreement in open court. So yeah, so this is another one that I think is important. The party must disclose the plea agreement in open court when the plea is offered, unless the court for good cause shows a party to disclose the plea agreement on camera. So again, I think if you make a plea agreement, you're going to have to uh, go before the court, and you're going to have to basically plead guilty, and you're going to have to give the court the facts of why you're guilty. You just can't say I'm guilty and that's it, and then go straight to the sentence. You gotta basically divulge. You got to show the plea agreement. This is agreement that I made with the government, and you also have to give the court the facts on why you're guilty. Like, yeah, I was walking down the street, and then Joe Blow walked up to me, and I told Joe Blow, get the heck out of my face, because he was talking crazy. He wouldn't listen. Then he swung on me. I swung on him, and then I ended up pushing him, and he fell down. He hit his head on the concrete, and he died. I didn't intend to kill him, blah, 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 so on and so forth, right? So the court is going to want to hear those details. You're not going to be able to just say, I'm guilty, and that's it, right? So again, that's going to be important in a few seconds, and I'm going to tell you why. So the judicial consideration of a plea agreement, I'm not going to read this. Basically, it's saying the court may accept the agreement, reject it, or defer decision. And the court has reviewed the presence of a pre-sentencing report, right? So basically, the court can do whatever it chooses is in the best interest of justice when it comes down to your plea agreement, right? Accepting a plea agreement, if the court accepts a plea agreement, it must inform the defendant that the extent of the plea agreement agreed is a type specified in rule, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so accept, reject, withdraw a guilty of no contest. A defendant may withdraw a plea of guilty of no contest before the court accepts a plea for any reason or no reason, or after the court accepts a plea, but before it imposes a sentence, the court rejects a plea agreement under Rule 11C5, or the defendant may show a fair and just reason for questioning the withdrawal. So basically, you can, if you had a plea with the court, or if you had a plea, you can basically take that plea back at any time, or not any time before actual sentencing. And the government can, the court can do the same thing. They can reject the plea. I think that's it. I think we're ready to wrap up this video. Let me just see. Um, Yeah, so recording of the proceeding during which the defendant enters a plea must be recorded by the court reporter or suitable recording device. If there is a guilty plea or a no contest plea, the court must include the inquiries and the advice to the defendants required under Federal Rule 11BC, right? And for the most part, that's it. That's it. So now let me go ahead and wrap this up and just get my point across. Now, in a hypothetical situation, and we're just going to roll with a hypothetical situation because we don't have any facts. We don't know that these guys accepted a plea agreement, right? So, in a hypothetical situation where a plea is accepted, first of all, I've already read to you that number one, the government and the court basically has to work that out with the defendant, right? So it's up to the government, the prosecutors, to accept that agreement. So in this situation, prosecutors are just like everybody else. There, nobody wants you to get over, right? And I'm not saying that Don Russell and Arline Jr. would be getting over by putting in a plea agreement. So maybe let me see if I can say this another way. They're going to want something, right? Everybody wants something in this world. So you're telling me that in this high profile case, the only thing that the government wants is simply for these guys to plead guilty so they can forego the cost of this trial? Is that is that what the trade is here? Do you think they're trading a guilty plea for a chance to not waste time and money on this case? Do you honestly think that that's what the exchange is here? Me personally, I think what they're doing, if there is in this hypothetical situation, if they're getting the guilty plea, they're going to want something because number one, you can get a lesser sentence right? They can leave you and the court up to deciding what your sentence is going to be, or they can come in and say, you know what, judge, he cooperated with us. We think he should only get probation instead of 12 years in jail. They have the power to do that. We just read that, right? We just read that. And then the other thing that I tried to get you guys to take note of is that you have to make a confession in court as it regards to that plea. And again, first off, they're not going to let you do a no contest. You can hang that up. You can hang that up right now. With a no contest of the court, I'm sorry, with the consent of the court and the government, a defendant may enter a conditional plea. You have to have the court's consent and you have to have the government's consent to do a no contest plea. So you can hang that up. You can, in this high profile case, there's no way in on God's green earth that these vicious uh prosecutors are going to let this man do a no contest plea, because they want to make sure that they nail R. Kelly to the wall. They're going to want Don Russell and Arline Jr. to somehow give up R. Kelly. Just use your common sense. I gave you the law. All you have to do is just use your common sense. They have to agree to it. If they don't agree to it, they're not going to allow you to do a no contest. So the no contest is out the window, right? So before the court accepts a guilty plea or no contest, the defendant may be placed under oath. Where's the other one? Uh, an attorney for the government and the defendant's attorney or defendant, when proceeding pro se, may discuss and reach a plea agreement. So again, you have to have their permission. So we've already established that you can't put in a guilty plea unless they're allowing you to put one in, right? So if you put this guilty plea in, then they can give you a lesser sentence. They can agree to drop certain charges, or they can agree to let you work out your sentence with the judge, right? So, I mean, that's pretty much it for this video. Basically, in order for those guys to plead guilty, they're going to have to give up something. There's no way that the prosecutors are going. I mean, think about all the stuff the prosecutors have done and ask yourself, do they strike you as a type of people that's going to give up something for nothing? Think about it. Yeah, I agree with some of the things that Stephanie D is saying, that sometimes people plead guilty in cases that don't require them to give up other people. Yeah, I agree in those cases. Yeah, the government, the prosecutors may allow you to plead guilty, but in this case, that's not going to happen. So that's it for this video. Leave your questions, comments below. Let me know, in this hypothetical situation. We don't have any proof. We don't have any facts. In this hypothetical situation, do you believe Don Russell or Arline Jr. is going to be able to plead and not give up R. Kelly? Please like, share, and subscribe.